Hi, folks. Criminal defense attorney Keith Stickley here with the Stickley Law Firm in Hillsdale, Michigan. Every single year, millions of Americans fall into a dangerous trap, and that is that of substance abuse. Oftentimes, the use of substance abuse can lead to criminal charges, drug charges. And in many situations, these people who fall into these traps that are charged with drug-related crimes have no other criminal record. Maybe they fell into the wrong crowd. Maybe they tried to self-medicate. Maybe there's mental health issues going on. But for whatever reason, they unfortunately started using or taking a substance that is banned. Well, there is a little bit of hope. Today, we're going to sit down and talk about what can be done if you're facing your first drug charge and you're trying to recover and move on with life without ruining your reputation forever. In this past year, over 37 million adults, that's almost 17% of the entire population of our country, will deal with some sort of substance abuse disorder in America. And quite frankly, many of these addiction problems begin as small, manageable, or at least what the people think are, small and manageable habits that are mainly for recreation or maybe self-medication if they have some sort of physical ailment and can't get the proper medication, or they're looking for an escape. Maybe they have some sort of a mental illness and they don't have access to proper mental health care, and so that they're looking for substances to self-medicate and help either ease pain or soothe mental anguish or do something that helps them cope with everyday life. And it's obvious where this ends up, right? It starts as a little problem, and then as you gain dependence, as you become addicted, the problem gets worse and worse and worse until the point where a lot of people, their entire lives start revolving around using illegal substances. In areas that I practice in rural Michigan, the addiction and the preferred substances have really changed from the opioids to methamphetamine. And methamphetamine, I can tell you, is something that has absolutely been just crushing, absolutely crushing to the local criminal justice system, but even more so to just families and people's lives in general. But what if I told you that being convicted of or taking a plea to a substance abuse crime, like possession or use of methamphetamine, didn't have to be a life sentence? But what if I told you a skilled attorney might be able to put together a scenario where if you worked on your recovery and you were able to complete a period of probation, that felony drug charge that you were about to take could completely vanish? In many instances and in many jurisdictions, it is possible. It's not a fantasy. There's a piece of Michigan law, often referred to as the 7411 rule, or just 7411. And the 7411 rule is a special law, a special provision that's carved out of Michigan's drug statutes that allows somebody who is convicted of a drug crime for the first time to not be formally convicted, in other words, not be sentenced to their drug crime, but actually have their charges completely dismissed upon successful completion of their probation. Now, this really can be a lifeline to a lot of people. You know, being a felon, it's no secret, can affect so many different areas and aspects of your life. It's hard to get a job. It can affect where you can rent a place to live. And it's got a lot of stigmas that go along with it as well. Using the 7411 provision in the law might be the solution to stop you from having a criminal record in the future that will negatively affect you moving forward. Now, a big question is, how would you go about using the 7411 statutes to actually delete or get the criminal conviction off your record for a drug-related crime? Well, the thing is, it really depends on how your case starts. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's essential that you get competent legal representation who are familiar with the 7411 statute, who might be able to implement and use that in any sort of plea negotiation or outcome of your case. So let's go over who might be eligible for 7411. For one, the crux of the 7411 rule is that it's for a first-time offender who's been charged with the use or possession of a controlled substance or marijuana. Now, obviously, marijuana is in a lot different place today in our state than it was just a few years ago. And I talk about marijuana with a little bit of a caveat, and that is that most marijuana possession charges are sort of decriminalized or are at least not prosecuted. And that leads me into my second point about eligibility for 7411. The 7411 statute provision, it's not available for people who are charged with the manufacture, delivery, or possession with intent to deliver that controlled substance. Now, what does that mean? Well, the laws in Michigan are set up to have very different consequences for the users of substances or versus the sellers of substances. In other words, the current trend is to not punish harshly people who are simply addicted to controlled substances, to drugs, but to get them treatment so that they can move on and lead productive lives in a sober way. However, when these kind of provisions were being put into the law, a big distinction was made from people who are selling drugs. Because for whatever reason, and there are many of them, we've decided as a society that the drug dealer is a lot worse because they are enabling, if you will, the users to do these things. This becomes really tricky to deal with because in our experience, it's often common for substance abuse victims, patients, if you will, people who use controlled substances to sell controlled substances to fund their own habit. And it's difficult to make a distinction sometimes between somebody who's just a drug dealer out there, slinging dope on the streets for profit, and somebody who's trying to support their own habit because that's the only way that they know how to get drugs. But it's important to know that if you are being charged with the manufacture or the delivery or giving drugs to somebody else, you are not going to be eligible for the 7411 provisions. Also important to know that the 7411 provisions are designed to be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, really. In other words, if you've ever had any kind of a prior drug conviction at all, you are not going to be eligible for the 7411 provisions. So a lot of people who come to our office who are charged with a drug-related crime want to know exactly how they might be able to take advantage of the 7411 because maybe they have never had a crime and they think that they're eligible. So the process it's a little bit on the complex side. So for one, you have to have, in our experience, a court and or a prosecutor willing to entertain the possibility of a deferral under the 7411 statute. It is not guaranteed. It has to be approved by the judge for sentencing. And this is where having competent legal counsel is so important because a competent attorney will know how to negotiate and how to bring it up and how to determine your eligibility before you ever enter a plea or take any responsibility for the controlled substance crime. So what ends up happening is if your lawyer is able to make those arrangements, hopefully prior to any sort of a plea, the plea would be entered and it would be put on the record that there would be a recommendation, hopefully by the prosecutor, for the 7411. And the plea, the conviction would not actually enter yet. It's sort of a defer, they call it a deferred entry. What would happen is the person would serve their entire length of probation. Oftentimes, in our experience, 24 months is extremely common. And during that probationary period, the person will probably be required to comply with a certain special set of probation terms that include programs and steps to help the person get off of that controlled substance. So drug testing is something that we see all the time. It's virtually mandatory. You could pretty much count on that. You'd probably have to be on probation and drug test the entire time. Oftentimes, to start out a term of probation, the courts and the prosecutor will demand that you go to some form of formal treatment. That usually starts by going to an appointment that your probation officer would direct you to called a substance abuse evaluation. And it's basically a doctor appointment or a counselor appointment that goes over your entire life history, your usage habits, how long you've been using, when you started, why you started. And they'll make a determination of what they think is the proper course of treatment to help treat your substance abuse problem. A lot of times also on probation, there are other requirements that the court and the prosecutor would make you want to do, like community service. A lot of times you have to pay all your fines off before you are allowed to come off probation. But the benefit to jumping through all those hoops is twofold. Number one, once you successfully complete probation, the charges will be dismissed like they never happened in the first place. Now, I'm going to caution you, while the conviction itself might not enter on your record, certain private background checks will still flag that you were maybe arrested for a drug crime. And that's another reason why it's really important to hire competent legal counsel, because sometimes things can be done so that those records can actually be cleared up with the various criminal history databases. It's obvious what the big benefit of taking advantage of a 7411 probation gives you, and that is at the end, you have no public record of the conviction. And there's some ancillary stuff that goes along with it too that we don't see as much today, but a lot of these drug convictions and pleas had some, if you will, side effects. In other words, there might be driver's license sanctions and various other things that if you were just straight convicted of a substance abuse crime, will not come into play and won't affect you if you can get this whole thing dismissed via the 7411. Now, another big question that we often get is, okay, so my attorney got me the 7411, the court accepted the 7411 plea, and I'm working hard on probation. What happens if I somehow fail to comply with my probation? I take off, I have a big relapse, I decide that the program's not for me anymore, I don't want to complete treatment like I had to, what happens? Well, unfortunately, at that time, the court can revoke your 7411 probation, and then the formal conviction will enter on your record, and you will be barred from taking advantage of the 7411 in the future. Now, I can tell you that this is a little bit of a slippery slope when it comes to the revocation of a 7411, because in our experience, we have seen people who have been in my experience, we've seen people who have had a 7411 revoked. Often, if they pick up another drug charge in the future, the prosecutor is much, much less unlikely to allow any sort of plea bargain or give them any sort of treatment options or benefit of the bargain. A lot of times they just want to say, oh, we gave them a choice, they can go do their jail time. And that's really unfortunate because, in situations where people are accused of drug crimes, it sometimes takes more than once to quit, right? Look at how we handle smoking in our society. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and it was pounded into our head, if you smoke, you have to quit, you got to quit smoking. And if you fall off the wagon, you quit again and you quit again. And you keep utilizing all these resources because it's going to improve your life and be so much better for your health. Yet the sad part is when it comes to drug crimes, especially with methamphetamine and opiates and all the various things out there, there is this constant push by our court system, by prosecutors to say, we gave them one or two shots, they didn't do it, they're not at rock bottom, so put them in jail and we'll deal with it that way. And I think that's extremely unfortunate because, a lot of these people that find themselves in these predicaments, these drug crime predicaments, haven't had up until this point any other contact with the criminal justice system. And they find themselves in this addiction situation, and they really don't know what to do when the addiction's taken over their life. And they start losing everything. They lose their families, their place to live, their car, half the time their will to live. And I think it's so important to tackle aggressively these drug charges from the legal perspective right when they start, because how you handle them going forward sets the tone for your future. It's not just the crime that you have to deal with when you're charged with these. You actually have to deal with the addiction part as well. And I can tell you, sadly, in our society, we are not yet at the point where we have proven track records for programs and treatment options that are getting people off of substances like methamphetamine. We claim we're doing our best. The courts think that they're doing the best. I've got some opinions on that. I'm not sure that I'm entirely convinced that we take the right approach all the time. But this is a relatively new development in the grand scheme of things, and I think that we're doing what we can to get the positive outcomes that we can. And one of the things that I really make a big effort to do is not just represent people legally, which is, of course, my job as a criminal defense attorney, but in any way that I can, try to make them aware of the various treatment options and such so that they don't just avoid a legal problem, but they avoid future life problems as well. Because if addiction is not treated, the addiction part, not just the crime part, if it's not treated, then you're going to be a repeat customer. And I can tell you, as a criminal defense attorney, we have plenty of business. And the sad thing is, repeat customers, especially for substance abuse related crime, we want people to minimize the amount of damage, the amount of legal damage that they have to endure when they're charged with a drug crime. But we also want to minimize the amount of damage that is done to their life and the time, the months, sometimes the years, and the money spent in trying to get to a place where they're not dependent on substances and they can go on and live their life. And nothing is better than when we actually get to see success stories. And I can tell you, sometimes it seems like they're far and few between, but we've had a lot of success stories here at the Stickley Law Firm, and we sort of pride ourselves on that. Nothing is better than having former clients, say hi on the street, and they've beat this addiction, and they're working hard on their sobriety throughout the rest of their life, and they end up with good, stable careers and beautiful children and life partners that are healthy and wonderful. And it can be the case when you're convicted of one of these drug crimes, if you have an attorney who knows what the options are and they're able to present the options and handle your situation in a way that puts you in the best possible position so that if you can really tackle the addiction issues head on, you can move on with your life and you're not labeled a felon, and you can have a productive, active life as a normal citizen. And it is possible, and it's not easy. It's simple. It's simple. The steps are pretty simple, but it's not easy. And if you or somebody that you care about find yourself in this predicament, I encourage you to give our office a call. We're going to bring you in. We'll set you down. We'll have an honest conversation, judgment-free, about where you're at, what you're dealing with, and what your options are moving forward. And we'll do an evaluation, and we'll see if something like a 7411 deferral is something that might be able to be of benefit and that you might be able to take advantage of. And if not, if there are any other options that we can, because our job, our mission when you walk through our door is to put you in a better place than when you walk through that door to begin with. And we take it very seriously. So we hope that you stay safe. We hope that you stay healthy. And if you need us, give us a call.